In 1926, Nikola Tesla sat down for a radio interview that would never again see the light of day. He spoke about wireless energy transmission, about tapping into the Earth's natural frequencies, about a future in which electricity would flow freely to every corner of the planet without wires, without meters, without bills. He described technology capable of making power companies obsolete overnight, reducing electrical utilities to relics, and granting every human being on Earth access to unlimited energy. The interview aired once, and then the tapes disappeared. The station cited technical difficulties, the transcripts vanished from their archives, and station records were altered to show that the time slot had been filled with music programming. For nearly a century, only fragments survived in the memories of those who happened to be listening that night, scattered testimonies from people who knew what they had heard, but had no way to prove it. So, what did Tesla say that was so dangerous it required erasure? What technology did he describe in such specific detail that it demanded immediate suppression? And why does the establishment still refuse to acknowledge this interview ever took place, even when presented with documented evidence of its existence? If you're into suppressed history and hidden technology, hit subscribe. This is the kind of content they don't want going viral. The year was 1926. Tesla was 70 years old, living in the New Yorker hotel, largely forgotten by a world that had moved on to other inventors and other ideas. The newspapers that once celebrated him as the wizard of electricity now barely mentioned his name. He had spent decades perfecting his wireless transmission system, watching his patents expire one by one, watching other men grow rich off his inventions while he struggled to find funding for work that mattered most to him. His AC power system lit up the world, but the royalties had long since dried up. He was living off the generosity of hotel owners who remembered his glory days, yet Tesla never stopped working. He never stopped believing that humanity deserved free energy. And when a small independent radio station in New York reached out for an interview, he agreed not for publicity, not for recognition, not to revive his fading celebrity, but because he knew his time was running out, and the secrets he carried would die with him unless he found a way to get them on record. The station was WNIC, one of the first municipal radio stations in America, broadcasting from the municipal building in Lower Manhattan. It had a reputation for giving airtime to controversial ideas, to voices that commercial stations wouldn't touch, to speakers who challenged the established order. Tesla saw an opportunity to bypass the newspapers that had mocked him, the investors who had abandoned him, the scientific institutions that had buried his work, and declared his later research. Fantasies of a mind past its prime. He arrived at the studio on a Tuesday evening in March. No entourage, no publicist, no handlers managing his message. Just Tesla and a weathered leather notebook filled with diagrams and calculations, equations representing decades of suppressed research. The interviewer was a young engineer named Robert Stanton, someone who actually understood the technical aspects of what Tesla was proposing, someone who could ask intelligent questions instead of treating him like a circus curiosity. The interview was scheduled for 30 minutes. It ran for nearly 2 hours. Stanton later told friends that Tesla spoke with an intensity he had never seen before, like a man unburdening himself of secrets he had carried too long, like someone who knew this might be his last chance to tell the truth before it was buried forever. Tesla started with the basics, aware that most listeners wouldn't grasp the advanced physics he was about to describe. He explained that the Earth itself was a conductor, a massive sphere of electrical potential just waiting to be tapped, a giant battery that had been charging for billions of years. He described his experiments at Colorado Springs in 1899, where he built a laboratory specifically to test his theories about wireless power transmission, where he generated artificial lightning, visible for miles, and transmitted power through the ground over distances of 26 miles without any physical connection. He told Stanton about the night he lit 200-bar incandescent lamps from a transmitter 26 miles away using nothing but the earth as a conductor, no wires strung between poles, no copper cables buried in trenches, no loss of power over distance, just pure transmission through the planet's natural electrical field, proving that wireless power wasn't merely theoretically possible but practically achievable with technology that already existed. But this wasn't new information. Tesla had published papers about Colorado Springs. He had given lectures about wireless transmission to scientific societies. He had demonstrated the principles to anyone who would watch. What he said next was different. What he revealed in that radio interview had never been published, never shared publicly, never included in any of his papers or patents. Tesla claimed he had discovered something in Colorado that he had never published, a frequency, a specific resonance that didn't just transmit power through the earth, but tapped into what he called standing waves of electrical potential existing naturally in the planet's electromagnetic field. He described it as a kind of planetary heartbeat, a baseline frequency pulsing through the Earth's ionosphere. And he claimed that by matching this frequency with his transmitters, he could draw power from the Earth itself, not just transmit it. Stanton asked the obvious question: if this was true, why hadn't Tesla built it? Why wasn't the world already powered by this system? Tesla's answer was simple. He had tried. He had spent years trying. But every time he got close to a working prototype, his funding disappeared. Investors would pull out, labs would burn down, partners would die in mysterious accidents. He spoke about Wardenclyffe, his most ambitious project and the dream that had consumed him for years, a massive tower on Long Island, 187 feet tall, designed to broadcast power and information across the entire planet simultaneously. J.P. Morgan had funded it initially, pumping $150,000 into the project, excited by the prospect of wireless communication that could compete with Marconi's transatlantic telegraph system. But when Morgan realized Tesla's true intention, when he understood during a private meeting that Tesla wasn't just building a communication system, but planning to give away free energy to anyone with a simple receiver that could be built for less than the cost of a good pair of shoes, the money stopped flowing. Construction halted overnight. Workers were sent home. The tower stood unfinished, a monument to what could have been, slowly rusting on Long Island while Tesla scrambled desperately to find alternative funding that would never materialize. Tesla told Stanton that Morgan had asked him a single question during their final meeting, a question that ended their partnership and doomed the project. If anyone can draw power from the air with a cheap receiver, where do we put the meter? How do we measure consumption? How do we send bills? When Tesla couldn't answer that, couldn't figure out how to monetize free energy in a way that satisfied the richest man in America, Morgan walked away and made sure no other serious investor would touch the project. This is where the interview took a darker turn, where Tesla's tone shifted from technical explanation to something harder and more bitter. Tesla started naming names. He talked about the coal industry, which employed millions and generated billions in annual revenue. He talked about oil magnates like John D. Rockefeller, who controlled the fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution. He talked about utility companies with billions invested in copper wire, power plants, and transmission infrastructure that would become worthless overnight if his system went public and people realized they didn't need to be connected to a grid. He claimed these interests had formed what he called a syndicate of suppression, a coordinated effort to bury wireless energy transmission before it could threaten their profits. He said this syndicate had people inside the patent office who would classify dangerous applications as matters of national security. He said they had representatives inside scientific institutions who would reject papers and discredit researchers. He said they had connections inside the government itself at the highest levels, people who understood that free energy would destabilize the entire economic order that kept them in power. Stanton asked if Tesla had proof. Tesla said the proof was in what wasn't there, the missing research papers, the patents classified for national security, the laboratories that burned down just as they were about to publish results. He brought up his own laboratory fire in 1895, a blaze that destroyed years of research, irreplaceable equipment, and prototypes that could never be rebuilt because the knowledge of how to construct them existed only in Tesla's mind and in notebooks that had burned to ash. The official cause was listed as faulty wiring, which Tesla found grimly ironic given that he was one of the world's leading experts on electrical systems. He told Stanton flatly that it was arson, that someone had been paid to ensure his research never saw the light of day. He pointed to other inventors working on similar technology, men whose names have been forgotten by history but whose work paralleled his own. John Worrell Keely, who demonstrated a vibrational motor running on what he called etheric force, a device that seemed to draw energy from vibrations in the atmosphere itself. Dead at 58 under suspicious circumstances, his laboratory immediately seized by creditors and emptied before any independent researchers could examine his equipment, his devices destroyed, his papers scattered, his discoveries lost. Thomas Henry Moray, who claimed to have built a device that pulled electrical power directly from cosmic rays, demonstrating it publicly multiple times, and producing enough electricity to power an entire house from a box the size of a suitcase, died in 1974 after surviving multiple assassination attempts, his prototypes destroyed in Bray, hints that police never seriously investigated, his research confiscated by parties unknown, spending the last decades of his life trying to recreate what had been stolen, never quite succeeding. Tesla told Stanton this wasn't conspiracy theory. This was business. If you had billions invested in coal, in oil, in copper wire and power plants, why would you let some Serbian inventor give it all away for free? The interview shifted to technical details that Stanton struggled to follow, but recorded faithfully. Tesla described exactly how his system would work, to a level of specificity he had never shared publicly before. He talked about tuned circuits that matched the Earth's resonant frequency, about creating standing waves in the Earth's electromagnetic field that would remain stable and accessible, about receivers that could be built for less than $1 using materials available at any hardware store. He explained that the Earth was already full of natural electrical potential that most people didn't understand existed. Lightning storms alone pumped billions of watts into the ionosphere every single day, energy that dissipated unused because nobody had figured out how to harvest it efficiently. His system wouldn't create energy from nothing, wouldn't violate any laws of physics. It would harvest what was already there, tapping into the continuous electrical exchange between the Earth's surface and the upper atmosphere. Stanton asked about efficiency, about how much power would be lost in transmission. Tesla claimed his Colorado Springs experiments had achieved over unity, meaning the power received was greater than the power transmitted from his station. He attributed this to resonance amplification, to tapping into the Earth's standing waves rather than fighting against them, to working with nature's existing electrical systems rather than trying to impose artificial ones. This is where mainstream physics draws the line. Over-unity violates thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created from nothing, but Tesla wasn't claiming creation. He was claiming that the Earth itself was a massive reservoir of electrical potential, and his system was just a very efficient pump. He described the planet as a giant capacitor, with the ionosphere as one plate and the Earth's surface as the other, with a constant electrical field maintained between them by solar radiation, cosmic rays, and the planet's own magnetic field. His transmitters would simply tap into this field, draw from it, and distribute the power. Stanton pushed back. If this was possible, why hadn't it been done? Why hadn't other scientists replicated Tesla's results? Tesla's answer was brutal and precise. Because modern science had been captured by the same interests that buried his work. Universities depended on grants from industrial donors, from coal companies and utility corporations that had no interest in funding research that would make their businesses obsolete. Researchers who pursued free energy found their funding cut without explanation, their papers rejected by journals whose editorial boards included representatives from energy companies, their careers destroyed through whisper campaigns that questioned their competence and sanity. He claimed that wireless power transmission had been systematically removed from electrical engineering curricula at major universities. Students were taught his patents were impossible, impractical. The ravings of a man past his prime who had once been brilliant but had lost his grip on reality in his later years. The narrative was set, carefully constructed, and endlessly repeated until it became accepted truth. Tesla was a genius, yes, everyone agreed on that, but a failed genius, a tragic figure, a man who dreamed too big and couldn't accept the limitations of practical physics. The interview was winding down. Stanton asked Tesla one final question. If he couldn't build Wardenclyffe, if the establishment wouldn't fund his work, what did he hope to accomplish with this interview? Tesla said he wanted the truth on record. He wanted someone, somewhere listening to that broadcast to understand that free energy wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The laws of physics demanded it. Nature had already built the system. Humanity just had to learn how to plug in. He predicted that within 50 years someone would rediscover his work, rebuild his experiments, and prove to the world that he had been right all along. The syndicate could suppress the truth for a generation, maybe two, but not forever. The interview ended just after 10:00 p.m. Stanton shook Tesla's hand and promised to air the full recording the following week. Tesla smiled, said he doubted that would happen, and left. The broadcast aired once, late that same night. A handful of people heard it. Most were asleep, but those who were listening, those who understood the implications, knew what they had witnessed. By the next morning, the station manager received a call. The details are vague. Some accounts say it was from government officials, citing national security. Others say it was industrial lawyers threatening lawsuits. What's consistent is the outcome. The master tape was confiscated, all copies were destroyed, the station's logs were altered to show that night's programming as music and standard announcements. Robert Stanton was told that if he ever mentioned the interview publicly, his career in broadcasting was over. Stanton kept quiet for 40 years. In 1967, dying of cancer, he gave a written statement to a researcher documenting suppressed Tesla technology. He confirmed the interview happened. He confirmed Tesla's claims about free energy, about the syndicate, about everything. The statement was filed away in a university archive. It sat there for another 30 years before anyone noticed it. By then, Stanton was long dead. Everyone involved with the original broadcast was dead. The truth had outlived its witnesses. So, what exactly was in that interview that justified such extreme suppression? Piecing together Stanton's statement, fragments from other sources, and Tesla's known research, we can reconstruct the core of what he revealed. Tesla claimed to have achieved wireless power transmission over 26 miles with 95% efficiency. He claimed his system could be scaled up to cover entire continents with minimal loss. and he claimed the receivers could be built so cheaply that giving them away would still be profitable through volume alone. He described a world where every home had a small receiver, no bigger than a shoebox, that pulled power from the air, no power lines, no electric bills, no utility companies. Energy as a public utility, free as air. But here's what made this truly dangerous to established interests. What Tesla described that went beyond even the threat of free energy. Tesla's system wasn't just about electricity, it was about information. The same technology that transmitted power could transmit data, voice, images, anything that could be encoded as an electrical signal. He was describing a system where every receiver could also be a transmitter, where anyone could broadcast to anyone else without going through centralized infrastructure. He was describing the Internet in 1926, a global wireless network that transmitted both power and information to anyone, anywhere, for free. No telephone companies controlling who could call whom. No telegraph monopolies deciding which messages got sent. No way to monitor communications, to censor information, to control who communicated with whom. A truly free exchange of ideas powered by truly free energy, neither requiring permission from any authority or payment to any corporation. This is what terrified the establishment. Free energy was bad enough, but free energy combined with free global communication that was existential, that threatened every major industry of the 20th century. The suppression makes sense when you understand what was at stake. We're not talking about a better light bulb or a more efficient motor. We're talking about the complete reorganization of industrial civilization around principles of abundance rather than scarcity. Tesla understood this. He knew exactly why his work was being buried. What's remarkable is that he kept trying anyway, even after Wardenclyffe, even after the fire, even after decades of rejection. He kept pushing because he believed humanity deserved better. The 1926 interview was his final attempt to break through the wall of suppression. He thought that by going directly to the public, by explaining his work in terms anyone could understand, he might inspire a new generation of inventors to continue where he had been forced to stop. It didn't work. The interview was buried. Tesla died in 1943, alone in a hotel room, with most of his later research confiscated by the FBI immediately after his death. His papers were classified, his equipment seized. The official story claimed national security. The real reason was protecting industrial interests. For decades, the 1926 interview was nothing more than a rumor. Tesla enthusiasts would mention it in passing. A few people claimed their grandparents had heard it, but there was no proof, no recording, no transcript, just stories. Then, in 1997, something strange happened that briefly brought the interview back into public consciousness. A woman in New Jersey, cleaning out her late father's attic, found a box of old reel tapes, dusty and forgotten, stacked in a corner behind Christmas decorations and old tax records. Her father had been a radio enthusiast in the 1920s, one of those hobbyists who recorded broadcasts for posterity, collecting them like other people collected stamps. One of those tapes was labeled Tesla Interview, March 1926, Do Not Erase, in her father's careful handwriting. She had no idea what it was or why her father had considered it important enough to label with that warning. She posted about it on an early internet forum dedicated to radio history, asking if anyone knew why a Tesla interview might be significant. Within hours, Tesla researchers from around the world were contacting her, offering thousands of dollars for that tape, explaining that she had found something that was supposed to have been completely erased from history. She had it digitized at a local media transfer shop. She shared the digital file with researchers who had contacted her, wanting to help preserve what her father had obviously considered important. And for a brief moment, perhaps 6 or 7 hours, the full interview was available online, confirming everything Stanton had claimed in his deathbed statement and revealing even more details that had been forgotten or suppressed. Then the file disappeared, the website hosting it went offline. The woman received legal threats from an entity calling itself the Institute for Electrical Standards, an organization that apparently doesn't exist in any public records. She panicked. She destroyed the original tape. She deleted all her digital copies. The interview vanished once more, this time into the Internet's memory hole. But people had listened to it during those few hours it was available. They remembered what Tesla had said. And some of them made their own recordings before it disappeared. Those recordings circulate in private circles now. They're never posted publicly. They're shared hand to hand, researcher to researcher, like forbidden knowledge, because everyone who has tried to make them public has faced the same pattern of threats, harassment, and legal action. What's on that recording? According to those who heard it during those brief hours it was available, Tesla goes into specific technical detail about frequency matching, about grounding techniques that maximize power reception, about the exact components needed to build a working receiver. He provides measurements in units that modern engineers can understand. He gives frequencies down to the decimal point. He describes the antenna design down to the gauge of wire and the spacing of coils, the grounding rod depth. The capacitor values everything someone would need to replicate his work if they had basic electronics, knowledge, and access to a workshop. And apparently, some people have tried. There are reports scattered across the Internet in forums and obscure websites of individuals who have built Tesla receivers based on the interview specifications. They claim to pull measurable power from the ambient electromagnetic field, enough to light LED bulbs or charge batteries. Small amounts, but more than zero, more than should be possible according to conventional physics. They post their results, their measurements, their circuit diagrams. These reports never last long. The accounts get deleted. The videos are removed for terms of service violations. The people stop posting. The pattern is consistent enough to be noticed, but diffuse enough to be dismissed as coincidence. Meanwhile, mainstream science continues to insist that wireless power transmission is inefficient, impractical, impossible at scale. The textbooks say Tesla's later claims were the delusions of a failing mind. The narrative holds. But here's what's interesting, what should make everyone question the official narrative. In recent years, we have seen limited wireless power technology go mainstream and be marketed as revolutionary innovation. Wireless phone chargers that sit on your desk, wireless electric vehicle charging pads installed in garages. These technologies work on principles Tesla described over a century ago, principles that mainstream science claimed were impossible for decades. The difference, these systems are short range, requiring the device to be within inches of the charging pad. They're inefficient, wasting more power than they deliver. They require proximity to a transmitter, which means they can be metered, controlled, monetized. They're Tesla's technology, carefully neutered and sold back to us as innovation, stripped of everything that made it dangerous to existing power structures. We get wireless charging that still requires being plugged into the wall, still requires paying the utility company, still requires permission from the power grid. What we don't see is long-range wireless transmission. We don't see broadcast power that anyone can receive. That technology remains classified, suppressed, or dismissed as impossible. The parts that threaten the business model stay buried. This is the pattern throughout history. Take revolutionary technology, strip out anything that threatens existing power structures, release a controlled version that preserves the profit model. Give people just enough to feel like they're living in the future, but not enough to actually change the system. Tesla saw this coming In his final years, he wrote that humanity would eventually access free energy, but only after the current order collapsed under its own weight. He predicted that scarcity-based economics would eventually become unsustainable, forcing society to reorganize around principles of abundance. He was describing a post-industrial future, a civilization that had moved beyond fighting over resources because the primary resource, energy, was freely available to all. He believed this transition was inevitable, written into the laws of physics themselves. The 1926 interview was his attempt to accelerate that transition. He thought that by revealing the truth, by showing people it was possible, he could inspire enough momentum to overcome the forces of suppression. He was wrong. The suppression was too thorough, the interests too powerful. The interview aired once and vanished, taking with it humanity's best chance at a clean energy revolution in the 20th century. But Tesla's prediction about eventual discovery might still be right. We're living through an energy crisis now: climate change, resource depletion, geopolitical conflicts over oil and gas. The scarcity model is breaking down exactly as Tesla said it would. And in that breakdown, researchers are rediscovering Tesla's work, not through mainstream institutions, but through independent experimentation, through shared knowledge in online communities, through people building devices in their garages and documenting results. The suppression is still there. Videos still get deleted, accounts still get banned, but information moves differently now than it did in 1926. It's harder to kill, it spreads faster, it finds its way around obstacles. Maybe Tesla was right about the timeline. Maybe we're approaching the moment when free energy technology becomes impossible to suppress, because the alternative, the current system, has become impossible to maintain. The 1926 interview is still out there somewhere, maybe on a tape in someone's attic, maybe in a private archive, maybe in classified government files waiting for declassification that will never come. But the knowledge Tesla shared isn't in the tape. It's in the physics, it's in the mathematics, it's in the Earth's electromagnetic field, waiting to be tapped by anyone who understands the principles. The interview was suppressed because it threatened profit, but the truth it contained can't be suppressed forever, because truth doesn't depend on anyone's permission. It exists independently, waiting to be rediscovered. In 1926, Nikola Tesla sat down for an interview that would never be broadcast again. He told the world about free energy, about wireless transmission that could power civilization without wires or meters, about a future without scarcity where energy was as freely available as sunlight. He provided specific technical details, frequencies, measurements, everything needed to replicate his work. He named the people and institutions working to suppress it. He laid out the economic reasons why free energy threatened the industrial order. They buried the interview within 24 hours. They confiscated the tapes. They threatened everyone involved. They altered station records. They spent nearly a century maintaining the lie that it never happened, but they couldn't bury the truth, because truth doesn't need permission to exist. It doesn't need anyone's approval. It doesn't need institutional validation. The question isn't whether Tesla was right. The physics confirm he was right. The mathematics support his claims. The principles he described are being used today in neutered, monetized forms. The question is how much longer we will accept the lie that he was wrong, the comfortable narrative that free energy is impossible, that wireless transmission doesn't scale, that Tesla's later work was delusional fantasy, and who benefits from that lie, who profits from keeping humanity dependent on metered power, on centralized grids, on energy scarcity, who has the most to lose if people realize that free energy has been possible for over a century, suppressed not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well. If you want more suppressed history and hidden technology, the next video breaks down the Philadelphia experiment and why the Navy still denies it happened. Click it now.